In 2019, we began to build our dream.
But the journey started long before you were invited to watch.
We walked a path that spanned nearly 2 decades.
There were times of joy, pain, and everything in between.
Our lives have completely changed, and we're ready to tell you how it happened.
We're not holding back.
Our mistakes, regrets,
What we wish we could change, our best decisions.
and if we do it again, you'll hear it all.
Come back in time with us behind the camera and answer the question, is self-building worth it? All right, guys, welcome back to Mr. Post Frame. Is self-building worth it? Today we're going to be talking about metal. We have, I think, 5 videos on the metal and trim installation. So we're just going to talk about kind of some of the different metals you can use, trims, things to think about. But let's talk about our design service and patron group.
Sure. So if you are looking for a good resource to get DIY questions answered, to understand the process of building a Barndominium, and to get access to Paul and I through live Zoom calls and chat rooms and things like that, head over to Patreon. The membership is really cool. There's a great community of people there that can support you throughout your journey. And then if you're in the market for design services, we do have Back 40 Buildings, which is our design firm. We have an incredible team there that can do stick, steel, or post frame designs.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and just jump into this.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start getting back at it where I left off. So this is kind of where I left off, right here. I had to stop there to put my porch in, so I got a lot going on right here. A lot. So still waiting on a piece of trim. Should have that in the next day or two. But putting steel on a post frame or pole barn building that you're making into a house with a bunch of windows is a completely different animal than just throwing it up on a barn or building with not many windows.
So in this first episode, you're showing a lot of around, you're doing one of the gable ends. And I think that this is a good opportunity to point out a couple of the things that we put in most of our designs. Is there's a trim piece up at the top, and then the wainscoting trim, and then how that is beneficial if you're DIYing. I talk about that.
Well, so on our gable ends, I mean, I literally did it on our house because I was putting up the steel by myself. My dad would come and help me, but like to have a 30-foot piece of steel that I had to work around a window, a porch, and another window, and then go up and have an angle cut, it's almost next to impossible. So I put a gable brake, I call it a gable brake trim, and it goes from basically the middle of your heel of your truss all the way across, and it breaks it up and it gives it a nice linear break. It looks really nice. You can make it a different color if you want to kind of set it off. We did that on the Robinsons.
Yep.
But it makes putting all that steel up so much easier.
Yes. Yeah.
And you can actually make that gable brake trim as big as you want. Like you can have it custom made. And that's another benefit of using like a Delta Metals or somebody, because Menards is not going to custom make you trim. Which kind of brings me into the house that I just built. What are we calling that? The cedar. I had to have some custom trims made. So I literally draw them up on a piece of paper, put the measurements I want on them, send it to Delta Metals, and the next day I have that trim.
Right.
And there's just cases when you have all these windows and stuff that you need to do that like the big box stores aren't going to do that.
Right. Yeah. And then afterwards, having that trim piece up there and then the wainscoting trim piece down below, you're breaking up your panels. So if something were to get damaged, you have less.
I mean, there are certain pieces on the house that if they got damaged, it would be.
Oh yeah, a big pain.
But it's no different than a house that's sided with LP siding. If like you have damage, it sucks because you're gonna have to tear a bunch of stuff apart
in order to fix it.
Yeah. And that's just the reality of anything. But like you said, that 3-foot wainscot piece at the bottom, like where maybe your mower throws a rock and dents it, or
that's not going to be nearly as difficult to replace as something that's up in the middle of the house.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
The metal we used for our home came from Menards, and it wasn't bad, but what I have found is there's a few things that were kind of game changers for me. Is going through Menards, the lead time is quite a while unless you buy like an in-stock color, which if you're doing a Barndominium, you're gonna have a bunch of different lengths, trims, and stuff that you need to get that they're just not gonna have. And so when you order your metal, it takes a couple weeks, 2-3 weeks to get it. And then if you damage something, it takes that again to get a backup piece, right? So
Yeah.
when we started building for other people, we went to a small company, Delta Metals, that is a steel roll former, and the service has been great.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
The tensile strength on the steel is way better. It actually is cheaper. And I can get a whole house worth of steel in a couple days.
Yep.
And that's pretty common for everybody, whether you're a contractor or just a normal person. Obviously, the contractor is going to get preference, but like you're going to be able to get your metal really quick.
Yes.
And if you damage your trim, you're going to be able to get a replacement. So they stock all the common trim colors. So it's a really quick turnaround if you can find a supplier like that.
Yes. Had you ever, before our house, had you installed steel on any panels on anything before? Okay.
Yeah, I've done it a few times.
Yeah.
Not to an extent, like when I say I've installed steel, it was on a building. It was on buildings.
Sure. Was it like one of those little buildings on the old farm we used?
Yeah, I've done it. I did it for multiple smaller buildings, but never like a house. And that's another thing to talk about. Like if you're building a shop, that is a lot different than building a home with a bunch of windows, with porches. It's much more difficult to nail it on that because you have a lot more cuts, you have a lot more trims, and experience does help because you learn how to get your metal around the porches and windows. I mean, it can get pretty difficult sometimes. We are creating some really good how-to videos on all the trims and whatnot, but it's definitely much more difficult to do a Barndominium with a bunch of windows and doors, porches, than it is just a straight up building.
Oh yeah, like we have post frame builders that straight up tell people that they aren't interested in building a Barndominium because it is so much more complicated.
Well, so much more time consuming.
Yes, yeah. So if you're going with a like Schaus style Barndominium that stays very simple, not a ton of windows, then a lot of post frame builders will do that, and your costs will be what people expect Barndominium building to be. But if you're going with something that just has tons and tons of windows in it and lots of porch space and everything like that, like you do need to find somebody who like is interested in that, and it will cost more because it takes a lot longer.
Yeah, and that's a real important point because I've had a couple people lately ask me about man hours. So if you think about a 40 by 64, a crew of 5 guys could probably put that up in 4 or 5 days, metal and everything, is a straight building. But when it becomes a Barndominium and you're wrapping the house and you have a bunch of windows and you have a porch, it just becomes much more detailed, and those man hours are going to definitely go up. And you should be concerned if the price is the same, because I can tell you the detail, if they can build that same thing in 5 days, the chances of all of the trim looking really well and being cut properly is probably going to be slim to none.
Right.
So I would say
it's harder to find the skilled labor that you need to make everything look as sharp as you want on a house.
Yeah, I mean, even and doing it by yourself is a whole nother challenge in and of itself as well.
Now, do you think that some people, we've got a little skid shed out in the driveway, do you think that like if somebody is wanting to do this part of the project themselves, could they build themselves a skid shed just to start getting comfortable with it?
100%. And we've told people that a lot. You're better off starting. Now, it's not always in people's budget, but if you can build your shop or a small garage or something first to kind of get your feet wet, kind of get a feel for how everything goes, that's going to help you because you're going to get a little experience there. Jumping right into something like like this, or a lot of the houses we've built with all these windows, it's It's really difficult.
Yeah.
And I would say if you're trying to find a contractor and you're going to have them build a house, I would ask to see some of their work. You know what I mean? I would want to see.
Don't settle, because we've had so many people reach out to us over the years, and they have talked about the metal being done so poorly that it's caused major problems with their like leaking and just all kinds of stuff, that like they're better off, like they're at a point where they need to take all the metal back off.
Yeah, and with metal, you need to, I believe this, even if you're building a shop, you need to wrap it, because you get 50, 60, 70 mile an hour wind-driven rain, like around windows and stuff like that. You need house wrap. Your windows need to be flashed properly in order to protect you from any water that could possibly get behind the metal. And like if you get 70 mile an hour winds with rain, it's like a pressure washer. Like it's,
yes.
And it's not, you obviously don't want water behind your steel at all, but like in that case, it's going to hit that house wrap. It's going to go out the bottom if everything is layered properly, shingled properly. And you're not going to have any problems. So, you see tons of buildings going up that aren't wrapped or anything, which especially here in the Midwest and further north, that creates not only some leak issues in, high winds, but it also creates condensation issues in the winter. Like when you have high humidity inside the building and it's, freezing cold outside, you're going to get frost, which then is going to thaw and it's going to leak. So there are lots of things to think about with that. So I guess if you're going to hire somebody, you need to do your due diligence and like look at their work, talk to some of their clients. And that's not, if somebody can't provide you with some people to talk to or some projects to look at, then they're probably not somebody you want to hire. Part of the reason I love Barndominiums with metal siding like they were originally intended is because of the low maintenance. The paint, we use steel with the Sherwin Williams coatings. It's guaranteed for I think 40 or 50 years.
40-year guarantee.
No fade, which 40 years, that's a long time. But
which I just had a call with our Sherwin Williams rep, and we on Patreon, and we discussed like the ins and outs of the paint and what that all means and everything like that. Side note, it's super cool. She said all of this like chemistry and the paint and everything is only as thick as a strand of hair.
Sure.
It is so thin. Mm-hmm. And she said that it's one of those things that certain colors are going to age better than others. And it's more, she said some of your really bright, like if you go with a bright green, bright red, those aren't necessarily going to turn like dull pink in a red, but it's not going to be it's going to lose some of its luster over time. It's still going to be red though. It's not like a 40-year guarantee and over the course of 40 years, your color is going to dissipate entirely. It's just some colors will just kind of lose some of their luster.
Yeah. The paint has come a long way.
Yeah.
In the last, even 10 years.
Yeah.
But talking about colors, the darker the color, the harder it is going to be to hide oil canning. Oil canning is something that just happens with metal. It's where your screws go in. If you're using an exposed fastener steel, you might see little dimples depending on the color. Lighter colors hide all that better. Textured paint makes a huge difference in whether you can see that stuff or not. So, but I would say the biggest advantage is just the durability, low maintenance. I love it. That's why I wanted a Barndominium in the first place, is because we have concrete patios, we're all metal. Like it's very low maintenance.
Yeah. Yeah. And with color choices too, like it's like cars. If the color of car is less likely to show dirt, so is that color of steel.
Right.
And the same thing. And then also they all have different energy ratings. I learned that recently too, that like your supplier, Sherwin Williams, has energy ratings on every single color. So you can see how, she said it's not just like, oh, black is just going to absorb all the heat and be less efficient. She's like, it's really not it's not that cut and dry. Like there's colors that are lower efficiency than black even.
Yeah.
And so you can get that information, and with some colors it's significant enough that it would impact your heating and cooling bills.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're up on the porch in this second video, showing your windows.
I mean, this
are a big deal.
Our house is the first major job that I did where it had this detail. So, I mean, I feel like I did a pretty good job, but there are with my OCD, there are definitely things that I would love to go back. And I mean, I would actually like to rip all of the metal off the house and redo all of it in a different color, because we had back 40 redo our plans in black, and I'm like, dang, it looks amazing. Not that we would go black, but it just changing the color can completely change the vibe of the house.
Right. It's something that only a Barndominium builder would consider doing, because you put metal on in order to never have to take it off in your lifetime.
Right.
So yeah,
but since we're talking about that, let's talk about metal roofs and sheathing and stuff like that. So if you drive around and start looking at metal buildings and you look at their roofs, most post frame buildings, shops, garages are not going to have any plywood or OSB sheathing under them, and you're going to be able to see the purlins. I don't care if your trusses are 4 foot on center, 2 foot on, you're going to be able to see those screw lines and those purlins. That creates some problems inside with condensation. You can get drip stop on the bottom of your steel if you want, which it's $1 a linear foot. I mean, it can add up, but we sheathe all our roofs with 1/2-inch OSB, and I think it solves a lot of issues with the condensation. It's more, obviously there's a lot more shear value there. It's stronger, even though the steel is rated to withstand
exposed fastener. Yes. So
fastener.
Our house doesn't have those.
No, it doesn't. But what I'm saying is I would go back and do that, because then all your penetrations that go through your roof, you're having to add something to screw those flashings to. And then putting the steel on your roof is much more enjoyable if you're going to be doing it by yourself. I know that doesn't make any sense, but it just makes a big difference. I lost my train of thought.
Sheathing, OSB, roof. So we do it on all of the, your roof panels all have the sheathing underneath it. Sides, we don't typically if we're doing exposed fastener, but anytime you deviate from an exposed fastener steel, then you're going to need to add that wherever you have standing seam, board and batten steel, stone veneer, any other type of material. You're going to need it, because those materials don't have the same shear rating as the exposed fastener.
Yeah, so basically the steel on your post frame home or building is the equivalent of the OSB or plywood on a stick frame house. Your siding on a stick frame house gives you no shear value. It's the OSB plywood that they attach to all the studs.
Yeah.
Would you say there are trims that are more important to get precise, like around your windows, versus a fascia, or is it just all important?
I mean, it's all important. I mean, you got to think like water. So, but they call it shingling. So you wanna make sure as you go up your building, whatever's on top is overlapping what's below it. So you got to think like that. I got a comment on a video that, I wrapped the house and then put the porch on. He's like, well, all your water's going to go down there, but there's a trim piece that will then go up and get taped. I taped that joint between the porch and the side, so if water does get behind there, it comes out and it can go out over go down the roof. But you just got to think like water, same thing with the roof. You're overlapping, everything that's on top overlaps what's below it, so the water can run out. So I don't know. There's a lot of different products that can make your house more secure, but you're going to spend a lot more money. There's self-adhered house wraps. There's self-adhered roof coverings that I would love to use, but you're talking like to put synthetic wrap on this, you're talking $1,000. To put a self-adhered membrane that's self-healing around all the screws, you're going to add $3,000-$4,000 to your roof, which if you can afford it, I think it's a great idea. Because as your screws go in, it's a rubber that's self-adhered, so there's no staples with penetrations, and then it's sealing around that screw. So even if that screw washer ever did leak, it's gonna go down and out the eave.
Yeah, but that always boils down to there are different levels of home finish.
Right.
There's your builder grade, there's your like mid grade, there's your luxury. So same thing with barndominiums. There's a range of products that you would use based on how much money you're spending, what the budget is for the home, what you're trying to accomplish with it. So, so like you don't have, we show, I would say, a lot of that, like
middle of the road.
Yeah, middle of the road. A couple of, close cell spray foam is usually more of a luxury upgrade in a normal custom home situation. In-floor heat's usually a luxury. But we kind of mesh it with some other things that are, it kind of all evens out to be more middle.
Yeah, and you can have really good results.
Right.
It's just
right. Which means that the way that we build, there are much cheaper ways to build than that. You could really dial some things down, but you just would not have the same end product.
Yeah, and there's also a lot more ways to spend more money.
Yes.
I would love to do a build where we're using board and batten, standing seam roof. I would love to do that just because it's just a different level of finish. And
it's priced that way.
Yeah, it is.
If you research like design and things like that, like they make certain products more expensive in order to make them unattainable for a group of people. Like that's kind of how it is. And so it's like you push so that it is more exclusive so that the people who do buy it, not everybody else has the same thing. Like that's why they do it that way.
And a lot of it has to come with the installation. Like putting board and batten on, putting stainless seam is much more time consuming than putting on some exposed fastener. And our whole house is exposed fastener. And I think it looks great. Mm-hmm. It looks, it's got a classic kind of farm look to it. And that's what was in our budget. You know what I mean? Right. And I'm happy with it.
Yeah, I don't know that, I think it'd be super fun to do some of those other things, but I don't think that I would be disappointed if we built again and we didn't do those things, because it is also one of those, like, it's on there, it's on the outside. You could spend that extra money on the inside instead.
Yeah, here's my 2 cents on that. If you could afford, let's talk about your roof and your sidewalls. If you could afford that self-adhered membrane under your exposed fastener steel on your roof and on your sides, I would go that route, because you're going to add probably $5,000 to $7,000 extra to your build. Where if you were to go all standing seam, all board and batten, you're going to be adding 20,000, 25, you know what I mean? And you're going to have, like, that alone is going to make a huge difference.
Sure.
In the long run.
Right.
We have no OSB below our roof, and it's not like we have, leaks and all that. It's just a higher quality.
Right. And, and with any other type of home, even though the products that are used are this is a very low maintenance product, it doesn't mean that you don't ever have to like walk your home or get up in the attic and check things. Yeah. Like it's like any other type of home build. You still have to pay attention to what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one thing we do that's different than I see a lot of people doing is all of our gables in an unconditioned attic, we're wrapping all the way up into those gables, because in the Midwest, further north, you get those extreme cold temperatures. Frost will form on that gable wall steel. So you want a barrier between your steel and your unconditioned attic, because if there's enough humidity in the air, you have an unconditioned attic, so you should have venting. So the air is coming in there, you have frost, most of the time it dissipates when the sun comes out, but if the sun comes up and it's warm enough and it melts, it's going to run down. Now, is it going to cause you long-term problems? Probably not, because it doesn't happen that often, but you still want to try to mitigate that if you can. And I've gotten up and looked, so like I know that it happens.
Right.
Would it be hard to find a subcontractor that would just do metal for me? Like I do all the framing, or is that going to be difficult to find?
I don't think it would be difficult to find somebody. It's just going to be really expensive. That's the problem. And I've went down that road, to try to find somebody, hey, where I can speed up our building process, where we frame it up, get it squared, and then a metal crew comes in and slaps some metal on it. But it's so much more expensive that like it's almost not. You're not able to do that. Now, I'm not saying you can't find somebody that would come in and do that, but like very few like post frame builders are going to want to come and put metal on something you framed.
Right.
Because if it's not square, they don't know the building, and that can kind of be disastrous for people. So it's going to be,
they're going to build in enough like cost, into their bid is to make sure that they don't lose money on it.
Yeah. Because I mean, if your roof's not square and all that stuff, it could really cause you some problems.
Well, and around here, a lot of the people that we've run into that they do metal, like metal roofing and all that kind of stuff, a large portion of their business is insurance claims.
Yeah, and storm chasing.
And so their bids are like, their bid to put the metal on the house is more than we bid the client for the entire structure. So I think one even like to put the roof on was almost as much.
Yeah.
So it's like we just haven't come across anybody that's willing to do that, because it is a tough part of the job.
Yeah. Maybe some ideas for you guys, if you're going to try to do some of this on your own, is build yourself a little model wall, and cut some, window trims and practice, make a corner and, do some of that stuff before you, that's where it would probably come in handy. You can go to Menards and buy the cheapest, like a lot of times they'll have a bargain bin where there's a bunch of odd colored J trims and stuff like that, where you could go buy some scrap J and stuff and then practice with that to kind of get a feel for it before you're actually cutting the stuff for your house.
Yeah. And you probably, if this is a DIY job, you probably want to order with a percentage of waste in mind.
Yeah.
So that you have a little bit of play.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because you can get like, you've talked about this before, like there's a lot of math that you're doing on the fly. And so like if the customer is there talking to you for long periods of time or things like that, or you get distracted, it's not difficult to accidentally cut something wrong.
Yeah. And I'm watching this right now. There's a lot of things I do differently now that I've learned and that have made it much easier to install my metal without scratching stuff. Like there's just things that I've learned to do, out of necessity, out of my desire to like have a better product, that I think can really help in the long run too. Like I never put my wainscoting on first anymore, because I've learned that, the smaller length your steel is, the more apt it is to be able to stretch or to shrink. There's more flex in it. So if you go and just, like, hey, I'm going to throw my wainscoting on here, and you don't measure all your 9-inch on centers all the way across, you can be way off when you put your other metal on. And a 20-foot piece does not stretch or shrink like that little piece does.
Yeah.
And so you can really,
right.
If you want all your ribs to line up, and you want your corner trims to cover. On this last build I did, like I laid out my walls. It was it was 40 foot, so we're 1 foot longer than 3 feet. So I know that if I just start, my normal trim is gonna cover it, and somehow like over that course of going around windows and everything else, like I shrank enough that my corner trim was about half inch too short of covering my rib, which I could have made it work, but that's where that Delta Metals came in handy. I just custom ordered a trim that would cover it. And that's another thing, when you're cutting and going around windows and doors like what we have, you can gain ground. And I know it doesn't make any sense, but these are things you learn over time when you're doing all this. And so like I've come up with processes like when I have a porch that dies in the middle of the wall, like I used to, measure from the corner above, make a mark, from the corner below, make a mark, snap a line, but like it's really difficult to make that rib line up. So what I'll do is I'll work one way and then I'll switch and go back the other way on the above the porch. So there's things like that you learn over time and whatnot. But
yeah, I feel like you could do a whole video of like which end you start at to measure from, measuring, if you have the 9-inch ribs that adjusting, you have to adjust everything.
Yeah, and it's really difficult, especially when you have this many windows, not to have. It's not the end of the world if a rib lines up on the edge of your window. You do not want it. I try to avoid it at all costs, but like there are ways to deal with it. It's just a little more difficult and time consuming. But yeah, there's a method. Like you typically want your overlaps to be away from the predominant wind, but you also have to think about like, hey, where is the main view of the building going to be? So like, do I want my overlaps to be hidden from that way? Like if you do a good job, it's hard to see them, but you can also, depending on which side you're overlapping, will depend on which side your screws are on, which can, like nobody is ever going to notice that. Like, but if you put them on the other side where nobody can see them, it's more visually appealing to me. Now, it probably doesn't make a whole lot of difference to anybody else, but maybe it does. They just don't know it.
Right. It's probably a subconscious thing.
When I cut my corner, or like all my corner trims, like my wainscot at the corner, my base trim at the corner, I think about like where are people going to view this the most, and then I make sure that side overlaps so that you can't see that overlap. So those are things that you learn over time that can make your building or your home just more aesthetically pleasing.
Right. Or you can watch the hours and hours of film that you have on these subjects and try to pull it off the first round.
Yeah.
You're DIYing.
I mean, I definitely have some tips that could really help people be more successful in the long run.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, and to not have leaking windows and just all the things.
Yeah. All right, guys, so that's going to be a wrap on this video. Like I said, we have 5 metal and trim videos in our original series, which we'll leave links to. You can check those out for, how I did it back then, and it turned out pretty good. We also have some other videos, and we have a really detailed video series coming up that will help you. Hopefully this was helpful. As always, we appreciate you guys watching. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, share it with your friends, and we will catch you on the next video.